children, our children travel Highway 60 constantly, and it's on 16 further north where the two boys were so mercilessly murdered. So,
there was Avi.
yes, Estelle.
You're muted. Sorry, Estelle. Estelle, you're muted. Sorry, I was just going through to mute everybody.
I wanted to say there was an editorial in this week's Jerusalem Post that said if they could only behave, if Israel could have a leader who would, they were comparing today's episodes with Altalena time, and that even though there was great division between the different sides in Jerusalem, Begin decided that he, for the sake of the country, would keep it together and would lower his antipathy. So maybe in this day and age, we could do that or think about it or have a leader like that.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Rabbi Avi, can I say something?
Of course, Salman.
No, the wrong Netanyahu was survived. His brother Jonathan Netanyahu is a park in Pelham Parkway called Jonathan Netanyahu. He was a brother that should have been the leader. He was killed in the, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, Zalman, I actually don't think anybody should be the leader for so long. It's too long. And when you serve, you have to know when to stop serving. And I'm a big Netanyahu.
Jonathan was killed. Jonathan was killed.
To read Thomas Friedman,
he was a brother that was a good brother. He was a good brother. Jonathan, he was the leader of the IDF.
Yeah, sure.
To read Thomas Friedman.
Parkway called Jonathan Netanyahu. He was killed. Saving the Jews, right? He was. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, of course I do. Yes,
that was brother.
If you read Thomas Friedman this morning, it's really scary. He's talking. So many people. They're saying in the army, if this goes through, they're not going to defend the country because they won't be defending a democracy. Right.
Well, right. That sounded like Tova, right?
Yeah.
I just first, as you know, Tova, I've not read the Times in 20 years. One of the reasons I don't read it is Thomas Friedman.
I'm with you, Avi.
Yeah, but it's just we're getting into politics here. But and what Tova says, I listen to very, very closely. If Tova reads Thomas Friedman, then I say maybe I should be reading Thomas Friedman. I have so much respect and love for Thomas.
He came through on my phone this morning and
I see on the phone. Okay, that's a good. Look, I think it can go both ways. Look, if our country, the great, beautiful land of Israel, is not going to make it with the right wing alone, and we're not going to make it with the left wing alone, we won't make it. Both sides need each other. That's what's so counterintuitive. Each side thinks they're the only one who knows, but in the end, we really need each other. And maybe this is a pipe dream, but I really believe that only by listening to the other, not just talking at the other, and it's not just a compromise, but coming together beyond coexistence, that I think we're going to thrive. I think that I could map out for you something that could be catastrophic. For example, what would be if this new legislation is passed and then the Supreme Court announces that it's unconstitutional? I'm talking right now. What happens if this right-wing legislation passes and then the Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional, and then a couple of days later, something very serious in the military happens in Yudan Shomron, some call the West Bank in Yudan Shomron. And the Army's chief of staff receives one kind of order from the legislature, and the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. It's another order. And the chief of staff receives conflicting orders. That could be catastrophic. But at the same time, I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't. I think that maybe, as the prophet says, from bitterness could come sweetness. I'm an optimist, and I still believe that somehow the two sides will wake up, and from this moment of very serious danger, maybe something good can happen. Maybe a constitution can be written, not just a compromise, but an understanding of how, something that I've shared with you many, many times, the idea of dialectic, which is very different than absolutism. Absolutism means I absolutely know I'm right and you're wrong. You're wrong and I'm right. Dialectic means that opposite ideas can pull at each other like a rope, that in the tension, that's where the compromise, that's where the creativity can come from. So it is a very dangerous time. I worry very much about my children, just as everybody worries about their children. This was an innocent young man yesterday. He really had just come to Israel. I believe he was pretty close with my brother's granddaughter, one of the daughters of my of Mordechai's son Ari, I believe so. And we have to all offer prayers and do whatever we can. Dina, actually, what I'm talking about, Makor Rishon said they would publish a piece that I did that was translated into Hebrew. So Dina, I'll make sure to get it to you. Maybe you can look at it and tell me if the Hebrew makes sense to you. And then we'll try to get it published somewhere in English as well. Enough of that. I just want to say good morning to everyone, to Vivian, Elaine. I see Helen's on, and Linda, you look as worried as I am. A lot to worry about. And Stephen, Robert, and Bracha. And I see my Arnie and Sue. Boy, I would love to. I'd love to hear what Murray thought about this. And just hello to everybody. And we're going to stop a little short today. Lance, it's good to see you, my Lance.
May I just say one thing, Rav Avi?
Yes. And
Okay.
Arthur, and Ruth.
I think that there is a solution. And the solution is to go to the one person in the world that is most dear to the far right. Who is that? Rabbi Mar Kehunah. And he wrote,
good Lord.
They Must Go. And this is the thesis. This is the rallying cry. This is what drives the right. However, I would suggest that you go to the end of that book and you read one of the paragraphs in there in which Rabbi Kehunah defines the resident ger. What is that, Rabbi Avi?
Yeah, look, I know what he does. I think he doesn't define it right. I'm very familiar with Meir's writings and theology.
Well, if I understand it correctly, he has created a formula to enable us to say they can stay. And if you can get the right and the left together and understand what it means to say they can stay, then I believe there is a solution. But that's my opinion, of course.
Right. Look, I think he maybe at another time we'll talk about this. I've often had this out with him. I was very close with him, but towards the end.
Really, what was he like? What was he like?
I can tell you, but I won't.
Okay. let's
Well, maybe let's put another person on the table, Ari Fuld. How do you feel about Ari Fuld?
I don't know.
I mean, I love the Fulds. His father was the headmaster at SAR, where I flew to Israel just for a day with Benny Krause when he died, just to be with the parents. But you know what? Let me step back. I just, if with your permission, Lance,
My
just
permission.
for a moment, I want to have.
I'm going to shut up.
Just an island in time, and I want to talk about what's really, really important, folks, today. And that is the garments of the high priest. This will solve the world's problems, because the portion deals with what's called the Bigdei Kehunah. And the class will be more abbreviated because our dear Fern, every Tuesday we would ask Fern, what are you doing today? And she would say, well, I'm going to Manhattan. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And invariably, she would say, I'm going to do this with my mother. And for the last few weeks, she literally was in the hospital for the last 24/7 week with her mom. And her mom, unfortunately, passed away. And the funeral was at 11 o'clock. So I want to zoom in and just say a few words especially about their relationship. So the Torah talks about garments, the garments of the priest, and there has been, it's not an exaggeration, volumes written about what is the meaning of each garment. That is, to look at the garment and not only to understand the way it was externally put together, and it was very, very complex. The high priest would wear 8 garments, and the regular priest would wear 4 garments. And there was meaning in each of the garments. I'll give you some quick examples. Probably the most famous pieces of the garments was that which was worn by the breastplate, which was worn by the high priest. And the breastplate, choshen, on the breastplate, were what's called the Urim Vitumim, lights of love. I believe that this is really one of the insignia symbols, if I'm not mistaken, of Yale University. And what does it mean, Urim Vitumim? Urim means lights, or is light. Tumim means to make whole. Literally, it means lights and the perfection. And so on its surface, there were 12 stones. And on each stone was spelled out a tribe of Israel. And the Hebrew name, Urim Vitumim, teaches us much about their meaning. Urim, again, comes from the word or, light, because at times the high priest would turn to the Urim Vitumim and would ask for divine advice. And the letters from this breastplate, it's actually on the breastplate, would light up with the response. So in that sense, the word tumim expands on the idea light. Tumim is similar to the word tamim, a pious person who walks in the correct path, because as the letters lit up, they needed to be read in their proper order. It's like the Wordle game. I'm sure how many of you play the Wordle? Many of us play Wordle. I even have started to play Wordle. I generally get it, but it takes me a long time. I'm very, very, very slow. One of the keys is that even if you've got the right letters, like yesterday, I think the answer was worse. You can put in horse or whatever it is, or the other day it was syrup. And I first put in the word pyrus, Pyrus, same letters, but the S and the P were inverted. So something lit up, but you had to read it in the right way. That's why it's Urim, the lights that are Tumim, that are whole, that had to be read or correct. The most famous example of a misreading is when Hannah was praying for a son. She was the mother of Samuel, and the high priest, Eli HaKohen, sees her praying. So he went to the Urim V'Tumim. He went to his, that piece on his breastplate, and he asked, well, tell me something about this woman. And the letters, Kuf, Resh, Shin, suddenly lit up. And he took those three letters and he read it Shikor, because it has the letter Shin, Chaf, Resh, which means Shikor. And the Bible tells us, the Tanakh tells us in Samuel 1, Samuel 2, that Eli saw Hannah praying and thought she was drunk. After all, the Urim V'Tumim said it lit up with these words. But the Vilna Gaon points out, one of the great geniuses of the 18th century, that when he saw the letters Kuf Resh Shin, he read it Shikor, but the same letters spell out Chaf Shin Resh, which means kasher. What does kasher mean? Kasher means she's in fact fine, kasher. He misread it. So the Urim V'Tumim requires a lot of deep understanding. In fact, in Torat Ahavah, I offered a different humble suggestion that the word Tumim could mean whole, W-H-O-L-E. It teaches that the Urim, the light to which it is connected, must be whole. And for me, for a person to be whole, one must be loving. There is no wholeness without love. There is no wholeness without love. I call this Or Ahavah, the lights of love. And it's for this reason that the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen who is so much associated with rules and regulations and externalities, is wearing this breastplate where what he's being told that when you utter a truth, when the light goes on, it has to be a light of love, of tumim, a light of inner love. That's why, as a Kohen, before we offer the priestly benedictions, the last word of the blessing of the priest is Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. God has commanded us levarech et amo Yisrael, to bless his people Israel bava, with love. So there is so much discussion about the internal meanings of all of these garments. Just excuse me for 10 seconds. There's so much discussion about the inner meaning. Another example would be on the forehead. He had straps, and there was something that read "Tzitz Lashem," to the Lord, precisely because the Kohen is a person of power. So that piece of the garments reminds the Kohen that the power is not his. He has to be humbled and recognize that it's for the Lord. He's not a primary person of power. The greater the power that a person has, the more careful a person must recognize she or he be, that there must be checks and balances, talking about judicial reform in Israel, or even what's going on now in America, where the president, whatever your politics, wants to unilaterally say there'll be no more need for students to pay the loans that they took. That, I think, adds up to about $400 billion. And now it's going to the Supreme Court. Can the executive make that decision alone? It's a very, very major decision. The whole checks and balances in America, judiciary, the legislature, the executive, has something to do with the recognition that we are a republic. This is not a monarchy. We're not kings. And whenever one has such power like the priest, there must be a recognition. The priest must understand. And this is what the garment is teaching. The message of the garment is that the priest through the garment should not feel full of himself. Quite the contrary. The message of the garment is one of limitation. Built into power must be the understanding of two words: stay humble. Stay humble. In the place of greatness, there is humility. And there's much more that can be said about the inner meaning of all of these garments. But today, in the few moments that I have left, I want to share with you an opposite idea. That while it is true that not only the garments of the priest has inner meaning, it's also true that the clothes that we wear, let's talk about our clothes. The clothes that we wear often it reveals who we are. What's the expression? Clothes makes the man, if I can expand on that. Clothes makes the woman. But at the same time, and this is the thesis I want to argue this morning, it's the reverse. Clothes can hide the person. The clothes can hide what our true personalities are all about. Isn't it the case that sometimes we feel down and we dress ourselves up and our externality is not revealing what's happening inside of us, but quite the contrary. It's not revealing, it's concealing. And it struck me that the word for clothes, and the clothes of the Kohen for that matter, is beged. Bigdei Kehunah. And beged, and there's no doubt that there's something correct about this. It's two in the text. The word beged, if vocalized, if vowelized, if different vowels are put in, if vocalized is, I think, the more correct word, can be vocalized bagad. Bagad means betrayal. Clothes means clothes, beged. But beged, by definition, also means betrays. In other words, clothes, as we mentioned before, garments, not only reveal, but conceal. Yes, they could reveal who we are, but they can hide who we are. That's a very general point that I want to make. This is the direction I want to move in. Let me summarize. After stating the obvious, because there have been volumes written on what is the inner meaning of the clothes, the outside is like the inside. We're suggesting this morning that maybe the clothes of the Kohen does not reveal what's happening internally, but it conceals. Beged, clothes, bagad. It betrays who I really am. One more step. Philosophers often talk about, many great thinkers talk about, that language intersects with clothes in the following manner. Words are the garments that mirror our inner feelings, our inner emotions. In other words, just as, now moving to what we started off as saying is obvious, just as garments could reveal who we are, words are ways of expressing what our inner thoughts are about. But, and this is the key point we're making this morning, while words can reveal what we're thinking, words like garments have their limitations. Words like garments have their limitations. Many of you, of course, have heard of the great Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. He wrote a book called Talks on the Parsha, and he says, speech, these are his words, is the garment of thought, expressing the thought even as it veils, V-E-I-L-S, its deeper dimensions. He's talking about the intersection of garments and speech. Speech could hide, could veil what's happening inside of us, just as garments could be deceiving. Garments could be deceiving. There was a great 20th century Austrian philosopher by the name of Ludwig, and I'm not sure of the pronunciation of his last name, Wittgenstein or Stein.
Wittgenstein.
Stein. Thank you. And this is what he writes. Language disguises the thought so that from the external form of the clothes, look at the relationship, one cannot infer the form of the thought they clothe, because the external form of the clothes is constructed with quite another object than to let the form of the body be recognized. Now think about that. I'll be very personal since I'm on with people whom I love. I've gained some weight. I hope I could shed it, but I'm heavier now than I've been in a long time. So how do I deal with it? Maybe it shows that I'm too vain. So lately I've been adopting the Israeli custom. What's the Israeli custom of wearing shirts, even on Shabbat? You wear the shirt out. You don't tuck it in. So why do you wear it out? I don't know. In my mind, it kind of hides that I'm a little plump down there. Belly is a little bigger. So basically, what am I doing? I want to hide the form of the body. That's why there are people who can wear whatever we wear, tight clothes to make us look thinner, or I don't know. You know more about this than I do. I only own about 2 or 3 suits, and that's what it is. I shift into them day and night. For me, one pair of shoes, very different than Mrs. Marcus, former president's wife. Maybe she became president in the Philippines. That's what he's saying. I want to read it again because he's intersecting language and clothes. Language disguises the thought so that from the external form of the clothes, one cannot infer the form of the thought they clothe, because the external form of the clothes is constructed with quite another object than to let the form of the body be recognized. Beged is not just clothes, but it's bagad. The goal of the clothes may not be, again, to repeat our refrain, it's not to reveal who we are, but it often conceals who we are. Let me share with you a beautiful, beautiful Hasidic thought, which speaks to this interfacing of language and clothes. In the Hebrew alphabet, of course, we have the Aleph Bet. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalid. My dear friend Shlomo Carlebach of blessed memory, the rabbi tells the story that he was in Moscow and he met a little girl who was thirsty for Judaism. And they sat and they spoke. And he was able to communicate on some level with her. And she said to him, I only know in Judaism 4 Hebrew letters, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. That's all. And when she would sing her own ditty of Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, It was the highest level of Hebrew text, Shlomo said, that he ever heard. And he actually wrote a nigun. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled, Beis, Gimel, Daled, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled, Beis, Gimel, Daled. And at the Bayit, we sing it to prayers that have the acrostic of the Hebrew alphabet. El Odom al kol hamasim baruchum vorach befi kol nishamam, and onward. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. And the letters reveal much about our understanding of language. These are the letters that, when put together, they express the language that we are speaking. And the first letter of that language is the Aleph. Aleph denotes the first letter of the language. And the first is always very important, the Aleph. But let's look at the second letter of the alphabet, and the third letter of the alphabet, and the fourth letter of the alphabet, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. This is remarkable. What does it spell? Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Beged. Isn't that something? Beged, or Bagad, clothes, Bagad, betrayal. This is not my observation. It's a Hasidic observation. Note that the Aleph of the Hebrew alphabet begins the alphabet, marking the beginning of the articulation of speech. It's followed by three letters, Bet, Gimel, Daled, which together spell Bagad. This teaches that speech is not a conduit through which one can express his or her thoughts fully. A level of concealment always remains. A level of concealment always remains. One final quote. This now is from the great Chaim Nachman Bialik. Had a great sense of humor, and also one of the most eloquent writers. Who had a better ability to articulate thoughts than Chaim Nachman Bialik? And the master of language wrote, perhaps of no equal, he wrote an essay called Cedars of Lebanon, Arzei Lebanon, Revealment and Concealment in Language. And in it, he suggests that no matter one's gift of language, words veil as much as they display. The inner thought on some level always remains hidden. And these are his words, Bialik's words. The matter is clear. Language in all of its facets does not allow us to enter its inner chambers, to get at the very essence of the idea or feeling. The reverse is the case. Words themselves are barriers, concealing what we wish to express. No matter what one expresses, let's think about for a moment, I want to express my love for another. Is there a way to express it, or does it go beyond words? Let me be very open with you. Prayer is sometimes difficult for me, challenging, but I love prayer. But there are a lot of words. And sometime in the morning, I just want to meditate. Whatever words I say, it's too limiting. Sometimes what one feels go beyond the words, beyond the prose. Maybe it's the poetry. Maybe it goes beyond the poetry. Maybe it's song, it's the melody which is touching the heart. And maybe it goes beyond all of that. Maybe it's silent meditation, just silent meditation. Whatever the thought, there's no way to define the thought with words because the words are too limitative. And throughout the millennia, beautiful thoughts have been expressed about the symbolism of the priestly garments. And I think they should all be taken to the heart. But on some level, their meaning, the meaning of the clothes of the Kohen remains hidden. Like language, as much as they reveal, they conceal. So that's the Torat Ahavah, the thought for this morning. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. We have about 10 minutes left until I get on and everybody who wishes gets on to Zoom into the funeral.
Let me just take
one-
a look. Let me just take a look for hands. I see Estelle. I see Lance. Am I missing any hands? And I see Arnie.
And I also want to
Estelle,
encourage everyone. Don't be hesitant to share your thoughts. Whatever thoughts one has, it's so welcome. And everyone has a truth from our experiences, from our creativity in our minds and in our hearts to express something meaningful.
I just wanted to say, Avi, that I really have to thank you. Your way of putting it gave me a whole new way of looking at things. But I thank you. But I have one question, and I don't know if it's relevant, but who designed the priest's clothes? I mean, what was in the person to design them or to give them or to have him wear them? I mean, I realize what they're supposed to mean, but how did it start?
Yeah.
Okay, so now,
This is the question that we've often spoken about, and it's found in the Bible. So a traditionalist like myself would say that it's divine, that it was mandated by God, ultimately in partnership with the human being, because the human being had to hear the words and then he had to put it together, sew it, or however it was done. But I realized that not everybody would make that leap of faith, and I hear that as well. I actually was recently asked. JPS is putting out a new translation of Tanakh, and it's a non-gender translation. There've been 2 translations of this JPS Tanakh, and they wrote to me and they said they'd like me to write an approbation, and I'm sure I'm one of many. So I wrote them back. I said, I think you have the wrong person. I pray I'm a theologian, but I'm not a scholar. I know that because I study with my son. He's the scholar. And they wrote back and said, no, they're looking for commentary of theologians. And I said, well, I'm of course I'm happy to write it. Now, my hunch is that they want me to write it because I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and here I'm going to be signing off on a gender-friendly, it's not masculine, it's both, of the Bible. And I think they would want someone in the Orthodox community to say something like that. And so people have warned me about that and said, what, you're going to sign off on it? And my response is that, it's not that I would agree maybe with every step of their translation of their, what they would call gender friendly. And it's not that, but my goodness, for 80% of Jews out there, this is what they embrace. And the Bible translation is a beautiful translation. So I eagerly write it. So Estelle, I fully love you, and whatever you believe, whether you believe it's divine or not, then it would be, I guess, people put it together. But if we look in the Bible, it says right in the beginning, "Vatatzaveh." These are the first words. That's what it says in the Bible. And you shall command. And throughout this
And
text,
God said, these are the things that you have to wear.
this is what it says. Now you shall command the children of Israel. "Vatatzaveh b'nei Yisrael." And paragraph after paragraph, "Atah hakrev elecha daron achicha." It's fascinating. And by the way, in this, a lot of people, when they get to this portion, there are many rabbis who say, well, there's nothing to talk about, but every portion has its beauty, really has its beauty. Even this portion about the making of clothes.
No, the language is great. I appreciate the language and the clothing, but you have to start somewhere. That's
Right.
my problem.
Yeah. And this is, they would start, I'm looking here, every single paragraph is for every garment, it's a command from God. Vasita, over and over. By the way, it's fascinating that this is the only portion that Moses' name is not mentioned once. And it's not mentioned because I think it shows that one should not, I think it's saying on many different things that this is Aaron's time. It's the priest's time, and Moshe didn't function long-term as a priest. He probably was the first priest for a week or two, but that's it. But let's move on. Estelle, thank you so much.
I'm sorry.
All right.
No, I love your question, and it's a great question and a
We
great
have
thought.
we have Lance's hand up, and then we have Arnie's hand up, and it sounded like maybe Stuart wanted to say something, maybe after we get by Lance and Arnie.
Okay.
Lance, you're muted.
Thank you. I call Rabbi Meir Kehunah to the stand. I want to use my Urim and Thummim as a Cohen. They can stay. Let the Talmud prove it, which is a paraphrase of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus in the Oven of Aknai. And so the Talmud tells us, Joshua sent 3 messages to the inhabitants of Canaan. He who wishes to evacuate, let him evacuate. He who wishes to make peace, let him make peace. Make war, let him make war. The choices are given. Either leave or prepare for war or make peace. The choice of making peace is explained by the rabbis as involving 3 things. To begin with, the non-Jew must agree to adopt the 7 basic Noahide laws, which include prohibitions against idolatry, blasphemy, immorality, bloodshed, robbery, eating flesh from a living animal, and a positive action, adherence to the social laws. Once he has done this, he has the status of a resident stranger, ger toshav, who is allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael equal to an Israeli. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lance. God willing, we're going to revisit this. There's much to talk about. Whether just on the basic level we want a theocracy and how democracy differs from theocracy and what is a Jewish democracy. These are the questions that the state of Israel should thrive and flourish that we're facing. Thank you, Lance.
Arnie. Arnie is next.
Please.
Arnie's just taking a drink. Hi, Arnie.
Hi, Shuli.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Avi. So, this is the first time that I know of in the Torah where there's an elevation using something other than, for lack of a better term, character. In all the Torah, we're basically taught if it's ethics over power, it's depth of character over appearance. And here we're told, put on some clothing and you're special. So the only way I can wrestle with this, and I would love to hear your opinion of it, is that in order to start a movement, you need charismatic leaders. But if that's all you have, the movement doesn't last. You need something to follow the charismatic leaders. You've often pointed out that ritual does that. I'm wondering if maybe giving vestment to the office rather than the person. In other words, it's Aaron and his sons who are going to wear this thing, and then there's going to be people after them who are going to wear this stuff, and it's going to be handed down generation after generation. So in other words, it's not Aaron who's vested with the power, it's the priesthood that's vested with the power.
I'm just taking notes, Arnie. Thank you. Just a couple of things. I remember when I came to Riverdale, Jack Shaw, of blessed memory, this is 50 years ago, he wanted to attract people to come, and they used to take out ads. The Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, the synagogue with charisma. I was a young guy then. I said, really, Jack? And what I've learned is that charisma is okay, but charismatic leaders can be dangerous, can really be dangerous. So one has to be very careful with that. And I couldn't agree more when you said that the power, I would say the spirituality, is not Aaron, but it's in the priesthood. And the garments that the priesthood wears, I would argue, they're as holy as the priest that's carrying those garments. I would distinguish between the designation in Hebrew, the shame beged, the designation of the clothes as being priestly garments. No one can take that away. They've been designated as the priestly garments. That's to be distinguished from calling those garments holy. Holiness is not a given. Holiness has to be something that is earned, something that we deserve. As a matter of fact, you know that there were priests and then the high priest. And the Talmud tells us in Tractate Yoma, it tells us that in the Second Temple, and the Second Temple stood for over 400 years, they list, my goodness, I think they list over 300 high priests, and they were all on the take. Most of the priests lasted for a short period of time, and they got the nod to be the high priest because somehow they paid for it, and they didn't sanctify the priesthood. They abused the priesthood. Certainly that is the case in the Second Temple, in the Bet HaMikdash HaSheni. But that point is something for another discussion, and that is, we are, when we talk about ourselves as being the chosen people, without getting into all of that, that doesn't mean we're the holy people. Chosen means we've been designated. Whether we are holy or not, that's something else. I'll say something that may bother some. The words of the prayer, they're as holy as the meaning we introduced into the prayers. And I was very, very taken aback when I saw a video when the young people who went into the Arab village as they were burning cars and homes, and there was a Palestinian who was killed. There's a video of their davening Mariv. What is that? Of davening Mariv while all of this is unfolding. This doesn't take away at all from the horror of the brothers who were murdered. It's beyond or Ilan of God of blessed memory. So holiness, I think, has to be earned. Jerusalem is in the Bible it's never called the Makom HaKadosh. It's called the Makom HaNivchar, the chosen place, the designated place. It's up to us to make it holy. That's up to us. That's our challenge. I want to stop here because I do want to get on the Zoom. Please forgive me.
Rabbi,
And,
I'm sorry. Rabbi, can I just say something? I just want to acknowledge that Tova and Cindy have their hands up.
Okay, so
And
let's do that. I'm not going to say where. Let's hear Tova and Cindy, and I'll get on.
Let me just say one thing, which is that next Tuesday is Purim, so we're not going to have class next week, and we'll pick it up the following week.
Okay, Tova, please.
Tova, you're muted.
I
There you
just
are.
think that more interesting than the Bigdei Kehunah is the fact that he can't be disabled. I think that I'd like to talk about that. I'd like to hear what you have to think about that.
Right. I mean, in one sentence, Tova, something that it requires further exploration. I wonder if the temple will ever rebuild. Would people who have disabilities, a Kohen with a disability, would they be able to serve? And I'd like to think, and have written how I think things will change then. The reason why I think the Kohen who has a disability can't serve is not because of the limitation of the Kohen. It's because people couldn't handle leadership coming from someone who is disabled.
And that's why he needs special clothing also.
And maybe, and who amongst us doesn't have disability? Maybe. Who amongst us doesn't have some kind of disability? You know, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president, all of his handlers never allowed him to be photographed in a wheelchair. He had polio, never. The feeling was if he'd be in a wheelchair, nobody could accept him as president with all the power that goes with all of that. But it's your question, Tova, is much better than what I just said. And maybe one day we'll try to look into that.
May I say something?
I think I was next.
Well,
I think Cindy is up, and then you, Zelman.
So I'll try to keep this quick and respecting that you have somewhere to go.
Oh, thank you so much.
But I think it's about the power of transformation, and by designating the clothes, when the high priest wasn't just a high priest, he was a human like everyone else and had other functions in their society like everyone else. But the designation of the clothing allowed that person to transform from their regular role to their specific role. And I think we see that in other things that we do. We don't drink our weekly glass of wine out of the same glass that, we use as a Kiddush cup. Is there a fundamental difference in that glass or cup? No, but we've designated it for a specific purpose. And by using some of our sacred objects exclusively for that purpose, it separates them from the mundane purposes that they also can have. So it's a way of enabling. The priestly clothes was a way of enabling the person to transform their role and to be recognized in a different state of being, although they're certainly the same person. But I see a parallel between what we do with our ritual objects and what we do with our clothing.
I think that's beautifully said. I just jotted down, enabling the person, basically what you're saying, Cindy, is enabling the person to be transformed. That's the goal of the close. The goal is to recognize that the close is the symbol. But if I can just to say a word about it, just the challenge is that the goal of the close is to impact the inner self. The goal of the close is not that the close itself.
Right.
It's not the close itself, it's something deeper. That's why I sometimes think that most ritual symbols in Judaism are very simple. Because if it's too ornate, then the symbol becomes a block to what it's intended to do, to go beyond itself. But if it's too ornate, then instead of being a conduit, it becomes a block. I don't know if that requires, I think, much more elaboration. What comes to mind is that on Yom Kippur, when the high priest, who wears fancy garments, but when he walks into the Holy of Holies, it has to be simple. You know what? I'll tell you why. And you struck that. Because if it was too ornate, maybe the concentration would be on the lavishness of the clothes. Whereas if it's simple, it's a recognition that the clothes is meant to do something, as you said, to transform the human being. Sometimes we can focus so much on the clothes that it blocks that transformation. Just the thought, but Cindy, thank you. And Zalman, you have the last word, and then I really want to get on to, and greetings to Dina, who's in Omer. It's great to see you, Dina. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Okay. You remember
Yes.
the film represent the 12 brothers, but in the end there was only the 12 tribes. At the end, there were only because of the
Thank you.
separation. Because the separation is only 2 tribes. I don't think Hashem wanted that. I think Hashem we should have consolidated all the tribes. That's you know what I'm saying. When the northern tribe and the tribe of Israel, they should. I think that was against Hashem's wishes.
You're in very good Zalman. You're in very good company, because in the Tanakh, there really, if one reads the Tanakh carefully, after the northern kingdom was exiled, there is a longing for the 10 tribes to return. And we're seeing a little bit of that now, because Zalman in Israel today, there are those who seek out what's called Bnei Menashe. Bnei Menashe, they're from the 10 tribes. And so what they do, there are many who are going to India, and they believe that there are Jews in India who are from the tribe of Menashe. That's not from the 2 tribes.
I know. I want to tell you something else. Yeah, I was president of the embassy, and before the other president, folks came from Cochin, India. His name was Elijah.
Correct. Correct. You're absolutely correct. And there are those who go to Ethiopia, and the argument is that Ethiopian Jewry that has come from Ethiopia, they are from the tribe of Dan. Some think they're from the tribe of Dan, also one of the 10 tribes. And in Israel today, there are 150,000 Jews who came from Ethiopia, who weren't brought to Israel in the bowels of ships to become slaves, as occurred here.
I paid for that.
Zalman,
NAJOEC.
God bless you. God bless you. On that note, Zalman, my dear Zalman, and everyone, we'll see each other in just a Freilich Purim, and all my love, and take good care of yourselves. And thank you just for bringing on this very, very difficult day. Thank you for that we can just share some light, the light of Or Torah, the light of Torah. My blessings and love to everybody. Shalom.